Did Moses really write the first 5 books of the Bible? Or Torah, as my Jewish people call it? Let's follow the evidence, not tradition. Hello, I'm CJ Everson, and welcome to The Jewish Skeptic. One of the most repeated claims in Judaism and Christianity is this: Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This claim is treated as sacred fact. This belief is foundational. If Moses didn't write the Torah, then the law didn't come directly from Sinai as written biblically. Authority changes, revelation becomes a process, not an event. But here's the problem. History doesn't agree, the text doesn't agree, and archaeology doesn't agree. And the people who first noticed this, they weren't atheists like myself. They were Jewish scholars. This isn't anti-Jewish. This is Jewish textual criticism. Some of the Jews have been doing this for centuries. Today, we're going to examine what the Torah actually says about its own authorship, why Moses writing it all is historically implausible, how scholars know the Torah is a composite text when it is actually written, and why this matters for biblical authority. This is not anti-religious propaganda, people. This is how modern scholarship works. Let's start with the obvious problem. Moses' death in Deuteronomy 34 describes his death, his burial, Israel mourning for him, a summary of his legacy as well. Unless Moses wrote beyond the grave, this section alone disapproves full Mosaic authorship. Moses didn't write his own obituary. That alone should end this conversation or discussion, but it doesn't, because tradition simply overrides evidence. Most apologists will argue with you and say, oh, well, Joshua wrote the last chapter. But the problems don't stop there. There's third-person narration. The Torah constantly says, the Lord said to Moses. Moses is never the narrator. He's the subject, not the author. To this day statements. The text repeatedly says, to this day. This implies a long gap between events and writing, a later author looking back. You don't write to this day while the event is actually happening. The Torah mentions kings ruling Edom before Israel even had kings. It places names that didn't exist in Moses' time. Cultural practices from much later periods. Genesis mentions the Philistines centuries before they even appear historically. This isn't prophecy. It's simply hindsight, or as we call it in the scholar world, post hoc literature. So what do these traditions claim? And what does the belief say? Well, Moses wrote the Torah under divine inspiration. God dictated the words. Moses recorded them verbatim. This belief becomes standardized centuries after the Torah was compiled. But here's the first red flag. The Torah itself never clearly claims Moses wrote it at all. And when it does mention Moses writing something, it's very specific and limited. So the problem of duplicate stories. The Torah contains repeated stories with contradictions. There's actually two creation accounts, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. There's two flood timelines, two wife as sister stories, two water from the rock episodes, and multiple versions of the Ten Commandments. These are stylistic flourishes. They're independent traditions stitched together. This is how historians know a text has multiple authors. The scholars noted patterns in language, theology, and focus. This is actually what led to the documentary hypothesis, which argues the Torah comes from multiple sources. The J source, or the Yahweh source, where God is personal, walks, talks with people. Then you have the southern kingdom of Judah, which is the early monarchy period. Then we go to the E source, which is the Elohimist, where you start to see dreams, angels, God is distant. This came from the northern kingdom of Israel. So these different theological concerns when it comes to that source. Then we go to the D source, which is the Deuteronomy source. It's law-centered. It's very centralized around worship. Most likely it occurred during the king of Josiah, around the 6th century BCE. And then last but not least, we have the P source, which is the priestly source, where you have rituals, pure laws, structured creation narrative, and post-exile theology. These sources were edited together, but not authored by Moses. These sources span for hundreds of years. The Torah is an edited anthology, not a single manuscript. So, when was the Torah actually compiled? Most scholars debate and will agree that a major compilation of the Torah was completed during the Babylon exile, but its final editing took place during the Persian period. The early traditions may date back to centuries, around 6th, 5th century BCE. So why then? Because that's when Israel needed identity, they needed law, their natural origin stories, and some type of divine justification for their survival. This explains the emphasis on the law, the angels and dreams, their obsession with their Israelite identity, a centralized worship of genealogical legitimacy. The Torah reflects a person rebuilding, not wandering around Mount Sinai, people. The archaeology and the Moses problem. Okay. I think here's the uncomfortable part. There's no archaeology evidence for a mass exodus, nor any evidence of Sinai encampment remains. There's no Egyptian records of millions of Hebrew slaves. There's no evidence of sudden Canaanite invasion. But instead, the archaeology shows that the Israelites emerged from Canaanite society. Their culture seems to have evolved locally with Yahweh worship developing gradually. Now, does this mean that Moses didn't exist? This doesn't mean that Israel is fake. To me, it means that the story just simply evolved. And the story is edited, literal history. So, what did the Jewish scholars know first about this? Well, of course, this is not new. Ezra questioned the Mosaic authorship in the Middle Ages, and Spinoza openly rejected it in the 1600s. Modern Jewish scholars accept multiple authorships as a standard for the Torah. So, don't get your panties in a wad. This is not an attack on Judaism, people. It's just Jewish intellectual honesty. If Moses didn't write the Torah, that means that biblical authority changes. Literalism collapses, and theology just becomes historical, not magical. The Torah becomes an epic, whatever you want to call it, a legal tradition to me, a logical document that was shaped by history. And honestly, to me, that makes it way more interesting, not less, as some people would think. So, who was Moses? Well, possibilities say that he was a legendary lawgiver, a symbolic founder, a composite figure, and a real person whose memory inspired tradition. But Moses didn't write the Torah as we have it, unfortunately. Tradition says Moses wrote the Torah, but history says it has multiple authors through multiple centuries that had multiple agendas. In other words, one big edited text, y'all. The Torah didn't just fall from heaven. It was actually fully formed. But it was written by humans, preserving their struggles, beliefs, and identity. The understanding that doesn't destroy the text, well, I think it finally explains it, to be honest. The Torah is deeply rooted in Israel's history, written by humans trying to understand God. But tradition says Moses wrote it. Well, history says he didn't. A big no. A big no at that. So, Moses didn't write the Torah, but the people who did left us something far more revealing. A record of how humans turn history into identity. And I will have a list of sources where I obtained this information for this video. It'll be in the description, just like any other video I do. You know, I don't want to leave y'all out there with no information or whatnot to make you guys think that I'm just making this stuff up or whatnot. But drop a comment and let me know what y'all think about this. I mean, history says Moses didn't write the Torah, but tradition does. So, is it for debate? Maybe. But I don't follow tradition. I'm going to stick with history. Once again, I'm CJ Everson, and this is The Jewish Skeptic. Catch y'all on the next one.
Do you know what I found? The more you know, the less you know.